Right, so as I covered in a video yesterday, things have soured significantly between Syria and Israel following the downfall of the Assad regime. With the new Hayat Tahrir al-Sham or HTS administration now in charge, it never slowed Israel down an inch, having invaded Syria themselves whilst HTS were still fighting, and subsequently set about seizing more Syrian territory, notably around the Golan Heights and up towards Mount Hermon, the highest peak in Syria, which lay within a demilitarised zone near the border of Golan, but on the Syrian-Lebanese border, giving Israel a possible alternative route to attack Lebanon by in the near future. Netanyahu has declared that occupation of this newly acquired territory will be forever, but by doing so appears to have burnt his bridges with HTS, they having fulfilled their usefulness, and who cares if both HTS and Israel happen to be CIA assets, right? It wouldn't be the first time Netanyahu has shafted his allies in the US as well, after all. But by illegally annexing chunks of Syria, he's playing a dangerous game. He's certainly not helping his case in the eyes of the world. Those world leaders still supporting him will look all the more degenerate to their own people over their support for Israel. And as for HTS, well, their boss al-Jolani has had a few words to say to Netanyahu over his claims to Syrian territory. Right, so I seem to be making this point a lot of late, but if you give Benjamin Netanyahu an inch, he's going to take a mile. And in this case, it is miles and miles of Syrian territory. Territory he is now declaring to be Israel's, and that this is going to be forever. So much for temporary holding of territory, though this permanent occupation of a chunk of Syria at this point extends, it is being alleged, only to the remainder of the Golan Heights that Israel didn't already occupy. They have held Golan since 1967, but only around half of it, and now they intend to keep hold of all of it and begin settling there, no less. And Netanyahu has laid responsibility for that upon Donald Trump over Twitter, via his Prime Minister of Israel Twitter account, saying, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu tonight at a press conference. Yesterday, a new and dramatic chapter was opened in the history of the Middle East. Yesterday, the Assad regime in Syria, the main link in Iran's axis of evil, crumbled after 54 years. Iran had invested billions in Syria, and it is all gone. This was a brutal dictatorship that trampled its citizens and slaughtered hundreds and thousands of them. And regarding us, it fostered hostility and hatred, attacked us in the Yom Kippur War, served as a forward position for Iranian terrorism, and constituted a pipeline for the transfer of weapons from Iran to Hezbollah. I would like to take this opportunity to thank my friend, President-elect Donald Trump, for acceding to my request to recognise Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights in 2019. The importance of this historic recognition has been underscored today. The Golan Heights will be an inseparable part of the State of Israel forever. Israel have not exactly made themselves out to be the friendly neighbours, despite their support for HTS, along with support for them from Turkey and the US, a CIA-backed group ostensibly to topple Assad as they were. They are being told by Israel now in no uncertain terms, we're king around here and we do what we like, and we're taking the rest of the Golan Heights, thank you very much. And if you've got beef with that, take it up with our bestie Donald Trump. He said it's ours in 2019. Oh, and by the way, really sorry for bombing Damascus and all those research facilities and all those 350 arms storage facilities and stockpiles you had. Oh, and your Navy. P.S. Actually, we're not sorry at all. Suck it with knobs on, or I'm sure words to that general effect. Now, the response from HTS has not been a military one as yet, though obviously you figure the threat of that hangs in the air. But the fact is, they aren't in any shape to start another war after taking Syria. It has depleted their forces, their munitions, food, medicine, all the rest, and they've a country to rebuild as they like it. And to top it all off, they were reliant on outside aid to do what they've done. An Al-Qaeda administration, as awful a prospect as that is what Syria faces now. But it means starting a war with Israel as well at the same time is really not on the cards, at least not in the immediate future. Netanyahu has hardly left things diplomatically open, though. He was never likely to. It's not his way. His goal was to destabilise Syria and screw supply lines from Iran to Hezbollah in Lebanon, and that has been achieved. Plus he seized all of this land now, which he's annexing and taking for Israel. But coming back to that point about only the Golan Heights being held permanently, though, for an organisation that Israel have been supporting for years, alongside others like HTS, you'd think, listening to Netanyahu's mad defence minister Israel Katz, that they were still talking about Iran, and not a group they aided and abetted and who claim to hate Iran and Hezbollah and be allied to Israel, who, and of course Iran and Hezbollah were allies with Assad. A short excerpt from Sky News' rolling coverage attributed something very, very weird to Katz, who stated that Israel's defense minister says the developments in Syria over the last 2 weeks have increased the strength of the threat posed to Tel Aviv. The immediate risks to the country have not disappeared, and the latest developments in Syria increase the strength of the threat, Israel Katz told officials. He said this was despite the moderate image that the rebel leaders claim to present. So HTS, who Israel have been aiding and abetting and have enabled to take down the Assad regime, are a threat to Israel now, all of a sudden then. Wasn't the case 5 minutes ago, so they're expecting some kind of flack from them now. Not interested in good neighbourly relations, in which case it's hardly the talk of diplomacy, is it? Thus far, all HTS have done by way of complaint about Israel's land grab is write to the UN to kick off about that, trying diplomacy, though arguably not out of choice as they are exhausted and depleted militarily at this moment in time. And this is also borne out by what al-Jolani has told Israel in light of their annexation of Syrian territory. He's gone on record now as saying Israel have no more excuses for more airstrikes on Syrian territory, that HTS were never their enemy anyway, but that Israel are crossing red lines and threatening escalation on Syrian soil. From an interview he gave to Syrian TV, al-Jolani has put on record to Netanyahu that he has no intentions of engaging Israel in a conflict, not that he really can right now, but also that Israel have no business in engaging Syria in conflict because their arguments for entering Syria no longer exist. They're no longer valid now that Assad's regime has fallen, and with it Syrian alliances with the likes of Iran. And it was that Iranian presence that Israel were using as their justification to enter Syria after all. But on top of that, Israel have crossed those lines of engagement, al-Jolani has also said, along with violating that 50-year-long ceasefire armistice agreement of 1974, which Netanyahu has arbitrarily declared null and void, and therefore the international community must now intervene to stop further Israeli escalation in Syria, with al-Jolani and Syria even seeking help from the UN and the UN Security Council over this, a letter I referenced in my other video from yesterday. Now, I somewhat despair of al-Jolani here. The international community will not intervene if Israel invades, and he really ought to know that by now, because they never do. Too many world leaders are in Israel's pocket, and right now they've softened you up good and proper. Too exhausted to now fight them, having fought the Syrian army, or remnants of them that hadn't scattered, to take down the Assad regime. No Syrian munitions or arms assets were left for you to inherit and make use of since Israel destroyed them all. And you've got no friends elsewhere in the area, like Iran or Iraq or Lebanon, because you've removed their allies from power. You have declared yourself to be their enemy. And whatever you think of Assad's regime and those alliances as a result, it's an absolute mess. And HTS have functionally isolated themselves now that Israel have done an about-face on them too. The Israeli Defense Minister, Israel Katz, appears to see you as a threat. So can we expect Israel to invade Syria going forwards? Because I wouldn't bet against it with a narrative like that. The greater Israel ideology, after all, requires it. And should that day come, the epithet that Israel has the right to defend itself and you functionally don't, no matter who you are, just like every other nation in the Middle East, will be ringing in your ears. If al-Jolani truly is every bit the CIA asset slash, at least formerly Netanyahu ally slash al-Qaeda leftover, then he's also a complete mug if he never saw any of this coming. Who will stand with you then when Israel comes for you next? Well, perhaps there is Iran after all, of course. With Israel playing with fire like they are, seemingly burning their bridges with HTS now that they've exceeded their usefulness, other alliances can be made, and some in Iran are pushing for that. If al-Jolani wants to be this pragmatic ruler and form an administration in Syria, and this is the way Syria simply is now, then relations with neighbouring states is important regardless of HTS's opinion of Iran's axis of resistance or whatever. And if Israel are sizing Syria up, he can't afford to be without allies somewhere. So could Israel's sneering superiority towards the new Syrian state end up pushing them towards an Iranian alliance instead now? I think there's an argument for saying they wouldn't have a great deal of choice. And then that would be another fine mess Netanyahu's getting himself into, wouldn't it? It's a situation we're going to have to keep an eye on. It could get rather interesting. It will be hilarious, frankly, if an alliance does come out between Syria and Iran again now, because it means everything Israel did in Syria was for nothing, and boy can Iran supply Syria with the arms and munitions that Israel have destroyed in Syria. Should it come to that, should they develop this bond, this relationship, this closeness going forwards? Meanwhile, for more of al-Jolani's response to Israeli belligerence, do check out my video on that from yesterday here as my recommended video for your suggested next watch. Please do also hit like, share and subscribe before you do so, though, so you don't miss further coverage of this story and many others. Of course, new content out daily. It's all very much appreciated. And I will hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.